MiG-3. Predecessor. The Mikoyan-Gurevich Design Bureau was founded in 1939 by aircraft designers Artem Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurevich. The Bureau was notable for its fighter and interceptor aircraft, which became a staple of the air forces of the Soviet Union, Russia, nations within the Soviet sphere of influence, and other nations such as India and many Arab states. Mikoyan aircraft were frequently used in aerial confrontations with American and Allied forces during and after the Cold War, and have become commonly featured in popular culture. Mikoyan aircraft include the most produced jet fighter family. Subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-3 was a Soviet fighter and interceptor used during World War II. It was a development of the MiG-1, which had been designed to meet a requirement issued in 1939 for a high-altitude fighter. To minimize demand on strategic materials such as aluminum, the MiG-1 was constructed mostly from steel tubing and wood. Flight testing revealed a number of deficiencies, but before they could be fixed, the plane was ordered into production. Work on the MiG-1, which at that time was designated the I-200, started in June 1939 under direction of Nikolai Polikarpov. The approach he selected was to build the smallest possible aircraft around the intended power plant, thereby minimizing weight and drag, the philosophy of the light fighter. In August 1939, Polikarpov fell out of favor with Joseph Stalin. As a result, when Polikarpov went to tour Germany's aviation works in November 1939, Soviet authorities decided to scatter his construction team and create a new experimental construction section, headed by Mikoyan and Gurevich, who later became recognized, not with full justice, as the MiG-1's designers. Little is known of the performance of the MiG-1 in combat, as most were likely destroyed during the opening days of Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Although difficult to handle, 100 were built before the design was modified into the MiG-3. Development. The large number of defects noted during flight testing of the MiG-1 forced Mikoyan and Gurevich to make a number of modifications to the design. Testing was done on a full-size aircraft in the T-1 wind tunnel belonging to the Central Aero and Hydrodynamics Institute to evaluate the problems and their proposed solutions. The first MiG-3, as the improved aircraft was named on December 9th, was completed on December 20th, 1940, and another 20 were delivered by the end of the year. State acceptance testing of 2 production aircraft was conducted from January 27th to February 26, 1941. They were found to be over 550 pounds heavier than the MiG-1, which reduced maneuverability and field performance. Time to 16,000 feet decreased by over a minute, and the service ceiling proved to be 1,600 feet less. The MiG-3 was faster at sea level and at altitude. While the ranges reached were farther than that of the MiG-1, they were still less than the 620 miles required. Mikoyan and Gurevich protested against the range results, as their calculation showed that the MiG-3 could reach 630 miles based on a specific fuel consumption of 1.64 pounds per mile. They blamed the deficiency on a failure to use an altitude correction and that the engines had not been properly adjusted. They went as far as arranging for 2 more flights between Leningrad and Moscow to prove that the MiG-3 could fly 621 miles. 2 production aircraft were flown on ranges of 680 miles and 603 miles, flying at 90% of maximum speed and at an altitude of 24,000 feet. Despite the teething problems with the MiG-3, in 1941, Mikhail Gurevich was awarded the State Stalin Prize for his contribution to Soviet aviation. The People's Commission of the Aircraft Industry announced its 1941 production plan for the MiG-3 on December 9, 1940. Zavod Factory No. 1 near Moscow would be required to build a total of 3,500 in 1941. 140 were delivered in January. Zavod No. 43 in Kiev would begin construction of the MiG-3 and complete 100 aircraft by the end of the year. Zavod No. 21 in Gorky would start to plan construction of an upgraded version of the MiG-3, though this last program was canceled shortly afterwards. Zavod No. 1 was on pace to exceed its quota, with 496 delivered in July, 562 in August, and 450 in September. However, in October, The German advance on Moscow forced the factory and its construction bureau to evacuate to Kuybyshev in Siberia, where production resumed under unsuitable conditions. Performance problems. The MiG-3 offered only a slight boost in handling capability and was initially fielded with the same woeful 3-gun armament as its predecessor, the MiG-1, under each wing. This lowered the plane's speed by about 12 miles per hour at all altitudes, which was unpopular with the pilots, some of whom removed the pods. Provision for 6 model RS-82 underwing rockets and 2 bombs were part of the MiG-3's armament capabilities. Like most unguided rockets, the RS-82 suffered from poor accuracy. Early testing demonstrated that when fired from 1,640 feet, a mere 1.1% of 186 fired hit a single tank, and only 3.7% hit a whole column of tanks. Combat accuracy was even worse, since the rockets were typically fired from even greater distances. To further complicate the matters, the RS-82 required a direct hit to disable light German armor, with near misses causing no damage. Best results were usually attained when fired in salvos against large ground targets. A number of MiG-3s were found to have unacceptable performance at high altitudes, despite having been designed as a high-altitude interceptor. The MiG-3's top speed of 398 miles per hour at 23,622 feet was faster than the 382 miles per hour of the German Messerschmitt Bf-109 F2 in service at the beginning of 1941, and the British Supermarine Spitfire V's 375 miles per hour. At lower altitudes, the MiG's speed advantage disappeared, as its maximum speed at sea level was only 314 miles per hour, while the Bf-109 F2 could do 320. Unfortunately for the MiG-3 and its pilots, aerial combat over the Eastern Front generally took place at low and medium altitudes, where it had no speed advantage. Also, at high altitudes, the oxygen supply was often insufficient, and the stall and spin characteristics were very dangerous, especially to inexperienced pilots. This was demonstrated on April 10, 1941, when 3 pilots of the 31st Fighter Regiment of the Air Defenses attempted to intercept a German high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft over Kaunas, Lithuania, flying at 30,000 feet. All 3 aircraft entered irrecoverable spins and the pilots were forced to bail out, one being killed. The Air Force Scientific Test Institute sent an engineer to investigate, and he found that the pilots had flown very few hours on the MiG-3 and that this was their first high-altitude sortie. Other problems included insufficient fuel and oil pressure at altitude due to problems with the pumps. Combat. The MiG-3 was delivered to frontline fighter regiments beginning in the spring of 1941. It remained tricky and demanding to fly even after the extensive improvements made over the MiG-1. Many fighter regiments had not kept pace in training pilots to handle the aircraft, and the rapid pace of deliveries resulted in many units having more MiGs than trained pilots during the German invasion. By June 1, 1941, 1,029 MiG-3s were available, but there were only 494 trained pilots. The shortage of ground attack aircraft in 1941 forced the MiG-3 into a low-altitude combat role, for which it was totally unsuited. Pilot Alexander E. Shaverev recalled the MiG was perfect at altitudes of 4,000 meters and above, but at lower altitudes it was, as they say, a cow. That was the first weakness. The second was its armament. Weapons failure dogged this aircraft. The third weakness was its gun sights, which were inaccurate. That's why we closed in as much as we could and fired point blank. Even with the MiG-3's limitations, Alexander Pokryshkin, the third leading Soviet and Allied ace of the war, with 53 official air victories plus 6 shared, recorded a number of those victories while flying a MiG-3 at the beginning of the war. With the MiG-3, he scored almost 20 victories. Pokryshkin's first involvement in air combat was a disaster. Seeing an aircraft of a type he had never seen before, he attacked and shot it down, only to notice as it fell that it had Soviet red stars on the wings. It was a Sukhoi II light bomber of the 211th Bomber Aviation Regiment, piloted by Squadron Commander Mikhail Gazenko. This was a new bomber type that had been kept secret even from other Soviet pilots. Pokryshkin then frantically flew in front of all the other MiG-3 pilots who were lining up on the other Sukhoi bombers, thwarting any other Soviet losses by his unit. Luckily, Gazenko survived, though the navigator was killed. Pokryshkin claimed his first kill of an enemy aircraft when he shot down a Bf-109 the next day, while he and his wingman were on a reconnaissance mission and were jumped by 5 enemy fighters. In the autumn of 1941, Pokryshkin, flying a MiG-3, took off in sleet and rain conditions after 2 other pilots had crashed on takeoff. His mission was to locate von Kleitz's 1st Panzer Group, which had been stopped in front of Shakhty in southern Russia, and the position of which had then been lost by Soviet forces. After some time flying at low altitude, low on gasoline in bad weather, he finally found the enemy unit and was able to return safely to base with his critical information. For the successful completion of this mission, he was awarded the Order of Lenin. Regarding the capabilities of the aircraft, he later recalled, its designers rarely succeeded in matching both the fighter's flight characteristics with its firepower. The operational advantages of the MiG-3 seemed to be obscured by its certain defects. However, these advantages could undoubtedly be exploited by a pilot able to discover them. MiG-3 combat losses in World War II were very high, in percentage the highest among all the Soviet Air Force fighters, with 1,432 shot down. Over time, the survivors were concentrated in the counter-air defense units, where the MiG-3's disadvantages mattered less. The last was withdrawn from service before the end of the war. The Russian company Avia Restoration has rebuilt 3 MiG-3s. They all use Allison V12 engines. One is in the U.S. in the Military Aviation Museum of Pungo, Virginia, and another, rebuilt from a plane shot down in 1942, first flew again around the start of 2010. It will remain in Russia. If you like these types of videos, subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. For more interesting military history content, check out our video library.